Hi, welcome to Hotchkiss at Home. I'm Rita Hotchkiss, the high-heeled housewife and your host. We're here with Jennifer Meinking, the creator of Loki of Midgard Universe. We're going to be making quiche Lorraine. Jennifer?
We're going to start with the pie crust. So pie crust can be very finicky depending on where you're making them. It's always best to do it in as cool of a location as you can. If it's summertime, you want to try to cool off your location, a fan would work. So with some recipes, you want a rounded cup, and others you want to level it. For this one, we want it to be kind of slightly rounded. So we're going to start with a cup of flour. And we're going to leave this here in case we need to add some later. Then we're going to go ahead and add the salt. So we have a cup of flour, and then we have half of a teaspoon of salt. How do you do this? It's stuck. Oh. Okay. That's
Yep.
half? Okay.
Perfect.
Wonderful. Using new tools here, which are super cool. Learning curve. So we got half a teaspoon of flour, and we're just going to gently mix that in a little bit. And then we want to add our shortening, which we've already pre-measured. 1/3 of a cup plus a tablespoon. In some climates, you might need a little less shortening. But generally speaking, this is a really great place for it to be. If you have a pastry blender, you can use that to cut the shortening into the flour. But also 2 butter knives work really well. You just want to cut them until it's nice and crumbly. We're not quite there yet. You want those bigger chunks to not be quite so visible, so that the shortening goes all throughout the flour, and that way when the pie is baking, you have that moisture spread throughout the entire crust. A good pie crust should be flaky, not too heavy, not too coarse, and flavorful. So I always recommend using shortening rather than butter, because butter will lead to a denser crust. Although butter is more flavorful than shortening, what we are going to depend on is the salt to bring out the flavor of the shortening along with the flour.
So tell us a little bit about this specific recipe. This comes from your book.
Yes.
And the cooklet that you created to go along with that.
Correct. So as one of my very first Kickstarter campaigns, I promised my backers a miniature cookbook, a recipe book, if we reached a certain stretch goal. And it took 2.5 years to create the recipe book. There are 6 recipes in it, and this is one of them. This is one of the first things that Loki tries when he gets to Paris. And there's a lot of information in the recipe book about authentic quiche Lorraine. This is a slightly modified recipe. For example, quiche Lorraine in France does not have cheese in it, but ours will, because that is what Loki's version had. And different restaurants in France, they also modify their recipes as well. So we are almost there, but we have something that's nice and crumbly looking now. So we're going to add the water. Now this process is really important, because if you overdo it with the water, you're going to have to add more flour, and you end up with too much crust or a tough crust.
So I'm going to lift this just so that people can see what it looks like.
The recipe calls for 3 tablespoons, or 2 to 3 tablespoons of cold water. It does need to be cold. Do not fudge on this step. For whatever reason, the chemical process, it does not work as well with warm water. So we're going to start with 2. This is a slightly different climate than what I'm used to working with. We're going to mix that in and see how that does.
So when writing your book and choosing these recipes, what inspired you for the specific foods that you chose?
I wanted to be true to the region that Loki was going to be trying the foods in. And I also brought a lot of my own experience from cooking, as well as trying different foods, different places that I've traveled. But I also did a ton of research. I do way more research than I do writing, because I want everything to be super authentic. And one of the things that people really find fascinating about French cuisine is the croissant and quiche. And the quiche Lorraine is one of the most well-known quiches. So it just made sense that that is what Loki would try in his first restaurant. And he actually has a croissant and quiche Lorraine all in one go. So it ends up being a really good meal for him. So I'm not quite certain yet about the consistency of this. It's looking like it is going to need some more water.
So tell me more about the consistency that you're looking for.
We want it to come together easily. And I'm probably going to have to use my hands for this part. So, yep, it definitely, I can feel already it's too dry. So we're going to go ahead and get another tablespoon of water. And I'm not going to pour all of it in. I'm going to just gently add until I get the consistency that I'm looking for. We want it to be moist and come together well. But the important thing also with pie crust is you don't want to overhandle it. And I've been making pie crust for years and years, so I know just by feeling it, it's going to need a little bit more, but probably not the whole tablespoon. It has a little bit of a fluffy feel to it. You can kind of tell with your fingers if it's going to get too dense. I think just a little bit more. So I've used almost the entire tablespoon. When it rolls out, we don't want it to fall apart. If it starts falling apart, there's not enough water. I am actually going to go ahead and use the rest of that. So it ended up being 3 tablespoons exactly. Now we're going to get this into a nice ball of dough and we're going to roll it out. Now this recipe, in order to keep your crust nice and crisp inside the quiche, we're going to pre-bake it first. You don't have to do that, but your pie crust could get soggy if you don't, just because of all of the eggs that are going to be on top of it. And I usually try to get as much flour from the edge of the bowl as I can. And now we're ready to roll. Yeah, that feels really good. I can feel the oils starting to seep through in the flour. You can see we've got a nice compact ball of dough here. And then when I pinch it, you can see it's a little bit flaky.
Perfect. Let me get out of your way.
I'm going to actually move the bowl here. And then we've got some flour that we're going to use. You don't want your pie crust sticking to the surface that you're using to roll. Now we want to roll this big enough that it's going to fill the entire pan. We are using a cake pan for this one, but a tart pan or a pie pan is usually the best. So you press it out kind of into the shape of a circle first. Make sure you dust your, this is a non-stick one. We don't need as much. And then you just want to gently roll it out and then turn it. Press in the edges a little bit so that you don't end up with really gnarled looking edges, although that's going to happen. But we can always cut those off. You always end up with just a little bit of wasted dough.
So how thick are you rolling it out, Jennifer?
We're going to roll it fairly thin. So this is too thick right now, but that's good because we're nowhere close to the size that we need for the pan. See how some of those are starting to tear already?
Yeah, absolutely.
But this is a good consistency for the dough. It's just wanting to move all over the place.
So you can actually take pieces of the material, pieces of this dough, and relocate them.
You can, but sometimes things like that happen and they tear. So if that happens, you just take a little bit of water and repair it. And then a little bit of flour.
We're doing
and
quiche
re-roll
Lorraine
it.
and paper mache.
Yeah, that didn't work. So sometimes you will have pie dough that is gonna just be stubborn.
A little bit of trial and error here.
And you just have to work with it as best as you can unless you want to throw it out and start over. Now this is not nearly at the place where I feel that needs to happen. It's just a couple of places where it didn't come together as well as I'd like. There we go.
Well, and you're with Hotchkiss at Home, so everything in this kitchen is trial and error. And everything in this kitchen will fight you to a certain extent, so I appreciate the effort.
It's starting to get to where it needs to be. Now, another thing that you can do too is if you have these jagged edges like this, you can cut those off and use them to repair other places.
That makes sense.
And sometimes you'll have areas that'll be thinner than others. Okay, so this is about where we need it. The entire circumference of the bottom is going to be covered, and then it'll go up into the edges. So now we are going to just gently fold this way, and then we've got a little bit of sticky here, so we're going to grab that, and you're going to fold it this way so that you can gently put it into the pie plate or cake pan as we're using. Then you center it. Make sure that your edges are covered.
That is fantastic.
She just whipped that out.
Okay, now what I'm gonna do, since this is a cake pan, and I've had to do this many times with not having access to a pie plate because I lost mine for years and years, I'm gonna repair a couple of these places using the edges, and then that's gonna leave the edges looking kind of wonky, so I'm gonna take the knife and I'm gonna go all around the edge and cut off the excess, but we do wanna have a little bit of a crust, especially when you're using a cake pan. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take this, we're gonna ball it up, and then we're gonna snake it. Now this part you might need a little bit more water. I can already feel it's starting to get a little too flaky. And you don't want it to be too thick. But basically, feel like you're in kindergarten class again. You make a snake, and then you start lining the edge of the pie plate with the snake. And you can do it even in pieces because we're gonna use our fingers to flute the edges. So I'm gonna attach it here so that we have a real pretty edge when it's all said and done. And we're gonna protect that edge in the baking process with foil. The edges will always cook faster than the rest. So you wanna use a pie shield or some foil to protect that. There's a couple of different methods you can use for fluting. A lot of people prefer to just use a fork because it's fast and easy and that keeps the crust on really well. But I'm gonna show you a method that is really pretty using your thumb and your index finger. You can also use an upside down spoon. There's a lot of different things you can do for fluting.
So as many of you know, I am not a baker, so I am absolutely in awe at this process.
Working with dough is just really fun. I love how it can change shape, and the chemistry behind baking is also, oh, look at that. So I accidentally started to go over the other one, but now we've got a nice good form. And you can use a spoon like this to do something like that to make, and that looks real pretty. Or you can do, with your thumb and your forefinger, you can do a pinching method like this, which gives you a really pretty edge. Now you want to use your other hand to hold it in place, because if you don't, then you're going to have pieces falling off. So you just kind of go around like that. Oh, I already almost lost a bit of it. And you end up with something that looks really pretty and really doesn't take all that much longer than the fork method.
It's gorgeous.
Okay, now we have our pie crust ready to par bake. So we're gonna fill it with white beans. You can also use, you wanna use a bean that isn't gonna transfer its flavor into the crust. You can also use ceramic pie weights, but beans work in a pinch. So we're just gonna line the bottom with the beans. You don't need too much. Oh, you know what? I forgot to do something. Can you grab me a fork, please?
Absolutely.
So you want just a single layer down here. It doesn't have to be heavy. And the reason we do this, so I'm gonna actually, I forget what this process is called. I should know. I bet it says in the recipe.
We refer to it as stabbing here.
That works. Let's see. Poke. That's what I put in the recipe. Poke all over with the fork. So not Facebook poking, which apparently people still do. And you're gonna wanna do the sides a little bit as well. This helps to release the air. You wouldn't do this if you were doing a traditional fruit pie or a custard pie, but anytime that you're par baking, because there's nothing in the pie crust, oh, that's not even needed in there. Because there's nothing in the pie crust to keep pockets of air from forming, you want to release the air, and then the pie weights help to keep it down so that you don't end up having bubbles. Which doesn't really affect the taste, but it kind of looks weird, and then you end up with chunks of egg underneath the pie crust, and it can just lead to some minor inconveniences. Okay, there we go. So we're gonna just kind of even that out a little bit. And now we're gonna do little chunks of foil to make sure that we don't have over burning or over browning on the edges. Now this you have to be really careful with so that you don't damage the side of the crust. So you just kind of gently lay the foil over. One of the things that I learned is that these will try to come off. So you really want to kind of try to crinkle them underneath that area. And usually 3 works perfectly for this size pie crust. You can see that one's already trying to jump off. So you just kind of have to form them together as best as you can. Yep, it really wants to come off. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay. And now we're ready to put this in the oven and bake it for 8 to 9 minutes.
Welcome back to Hotchkiss at Home. I am your host, the High-Heeled Housewife, and we are here with Jennifer Meinking, and we are making quiche Lorraine. Right now the pie is par baking.
Also called blind baking or pre-baking.
Oh, that's amazing. And so we're going to be putting together the insides.
Correct. So we're going to start with 3 eggs. We're going to whip those up really nicely. It's always great if you can have your ingredients at room temperature as much as possible, but if not, it's not the end of the world. It's just all part of the chemistry behind baking and cooking. So we're going to whip these real well.
And Jennifer, if you need me to hand you anything or add anything, please let me know.
Okay. Then we're going to add a cup of heavy whipping cream. This is exactly a cup, correct?
Correct.
This lady beside me is super smart. She pre-measures everything. It is so efficient. Okay, we're going to get this going. We want it to be nice and light and fluffy.
So, when did you discover your love for writing? When did that begin?
Oh goodness, I've always been a storyteller. Even as a small child, I was always telling stories, spinning yarns, telling tales. And that's what I kind of like to call myself, as a professional storyteller.
I love that.
So, and I do that through many different outlets, especially my books. I started to have a dream that I could actually do something with my writing ability. I'd had several teachers and people tell me they really enjoyed my stories, they liked my writing. So when I was 18, I wrote a book for my sister about mermaids, and they were trying to they were solving some mystery. I barely remember it, but she was turning 8, and that was my gift for her 8th birthday,
sweet.
was to write this little miniature novella for her. And I spent an entire summer, I did it all handwritten, and then I presented it to her. She still has it. And that was just a really great bonding thing for her, and it really made me think, what if I could do this with my life and become a writer, an author? So I took some courses in college. My first submission to a magazine was rejected, and I quit, which was really sad. I had been warned that it happened, and I didn't listen, and I was just too immature and too emotionally fragile. I couldn't handle it, so I quit, and I went on to other things. And occasionally, over time, I would reach out and try to write again, but things just wouldn't gel, they wouldn't come together. I would end up putting aside everything that I'd done, didn't finish anything. Was busy raising a family and pursuing other things. And then suddenly my inner author just unlocked.
Yeah.
And it was actually through my fascination with Loki, as presented in the Marvel movies, which is what got me interested in him in the first place. But then I started looking into Loki in Norse mythology, and I just really fell in love with the character. And I just wanted to tell a silly little fan fiction story for my daughter and I, and it ended up turning into a universe.
Yeah.
I thought I'd write a short story. The short story turned into a novel. The novel turned into a trilogy. The trilogy turned into a 5-book series. And now I have multiple offshoots going all over the place, and I've realized I have had a universe come to life in my mind, and it's been really exciting. All right, this is nice and light and fluffy. So now we're gonna go ahead and add the spices.
So we have salt, nutmeg, and white pepper.
We want just a pinch of salt. So when I do a pinch, I don't tend to do a literal pinch. I just kind of, sometimes I'll grab it. You don't want a ton of salt because we have salty meats and cheese that are going to be going in this, and you don't want to overdo the salt content. So you don't want it to be bland either. Then we have pepper. So we need a 1/4 teaspoon of that. And then we're also going to need a 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg. Nutmeg has an interesting reaction to eggs. It just does something to the flavor that really brings out the eggs. It has like just the slightest amount of sweetness to it, but it's a savory sweetness, which you'll see when you try it. Okay, so we got a 1/4 teaspoon of black pepper, white pepper going in. You can use black or white. And then we have our 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg. We've already done our salt, so we're going to mix that up really nicely. And then we're going to add our green onions. We need 2 tablespoons of this. You don't have to be too fussy about it. So I'm just going to, rather than use an actual measuring spoon, I'm going to grab that. And we're going to be adding some of these later for garnish as well, but those are going to be fresh, whereas these are going to bake into the mixture. Okay. Now we have our mixture done, and we're ready to start layering once the crust is finished.
Okay, welcome back to Hotchkiss at Home. I'm Rita Hotchkiss, the high-heeled housewife and your host. We're here with Jennifer Meinking. We have par-baked the pie crust and are now working on the quiche Lorraine filling.
Okay, so you're going to want to make sure that you don't use too much cheese. Traditionally, as I said before, quiche Lorraine doesn't even have cheese in it. The more cheese you add, the better the flavor. However, the denser it gets. So if you don't mind a little bit of density, then you can add more cheese. If you want it to be super light and fluffy, then you're going to want to add less. Now my recipe calls for a 1/4 cup of grated or shredded Swiss, or I don't even know how to say it, Gruyere.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Yes.
Cheese. That is the best flavor combination for what we're doing here, but you can experiment with other cheeses if you'd like. We are going to now, so we put a small layer of cheese on the bottom, and now, oh, that's not right. Now we're going to put the meat in. So we have chopped up, already cooked pieces of bacon. It ended up being about a cup's worth. Now, traditional quiche Lorraine uses lardon, but we are using bacon, which is very similar.
Lardon has a higher fat content.
And we're also going to put ham in it. And again, this is based on the recipe that Loki tried. So his version had all of these ingredients in it. It had the cheese and the eggs and the green onions. In fact, he mentions the green onions. And my recipe book has little excerpts from the book of where those are contained. So now that we have the cheese on the bottom and we have the layer of meat on the top, we're going to go ahead and put in our whipped egg mixture that we had already made. And because beaten egg is very invasive. It went all into the layers of the cheese and the meat. So now you can see we have this super pretty quiche that's gonna bake like that. And now we're gonna just sprinkle a little bit of cheese all over the rest of it to have like just a little bit of a cheesy top. But again, we do not want to overdo it.
One of the things that I've noticed while working with different people who cook and bake is the variety between those that utilize the recipe on hand and those that cook from memory. I've noticed that bakers often do rely on the recipe. Jennifer has been kind enough to actually give the recipe to the viewers of Hotchkiss at Home in this episode. So you will have access to not only the ingredients, but also this specific recipe. It is part of the Loki of Midgard cooklet booklet and is available for purchase on Amazon or will be. The link will be provided in the comments below. Thank you very much for providing that.
Absolutely. And now we are going to bake this beauty for 30 to 40 minutes. You want to make sure when it's baked that it's not going to be jiggling around too much. So we're going to go ahead and put this in the oven and let it do its work.
Welcome back to Hotchkiss at Home. I am your host, Rita Hotchkiss, the high-heeled housewife, and we are here with Jennifer Meinking, the author and creator of the Loki of Midgard universe. And we are making quiche Lorraine. We're going to talk a little bit about you and a little bit about the incredible things that you have created. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's been fun.
This is amazing. So you are our first interview in this series, and your talents are endless. We met not that long ago, completely unrelated to either of our businesses, and in fact it was your hoodie with your Loki design on it that caught my eye. And she has been gracious enough to give the Hotchkiss at Home crew the shirts, but talk to me a little bit about this imagery.
So when we were designing the cover for the first book, The Making of a Magician, I knew I wanted to do something that was really striking. And one of the things that I talk about a lot in the material is Loki's unusually bright green eyes. And I've really developed that a lot. And so to have his bright green eyes on the cover of my first book, and now I wear it because I have the t-shirt and I have the hoodie and I have other merchandise that has the bright green eyes, and it's kind of become a part of my branding. So the colors, Loki's colors traditionally are black and green, and that might have been something that was more started with Marvel putting his uniform together the way that they did, but it's also rooted in Norse mythology. In Norse mythology, Loki is usually depicted as having red hair and green eyes. However, there are a lot of artists over the years, hundreds of years ago, he's been around a long time, that have depicted him with black hair. And I really liked Tom Hiddleston's portrayal of Loki with black hair. Now, Tom Hiddleston has blue eyes, but in the film, they've gone back and forth between his eyes being more green than blue. And then, little known fact, Alan Cumming actually did a portrayal of Loki that was truly fabulous in the sequel to The Mask that Jim Carrey did. The movie itself I don't really care for, but Alan Cumming's depiction of Loki is sheer genius. Now, he had black hair and he wore a leather jacket and he was just super fun and extremely sassy, and it was fantastic. So I've taken a lot of that into my version of Loki as well. So I tell people, and this is great because this is a cooking show, I tell people that if you picture the Tom Hiddleston version of Loki, Marvel's version of Loki, the comic Loki, Alan Cumming's Loki, and Norse mythology Loki, and you put it in a blender and scramble it all up and plop it right down in the middle of the Roaring '20s, you have my first series, the Loki of Midgard series.
And I've actually read the books, and they're fantastic. That's not just fanfare. I read the first book in less than a day, and started in on the second book, and purposely distracted myself so that I could have something to savor a little bit longer, because they are so well written. You were talking about earlier the research that you do behind it, and I'm a firm believer that good authors are prolific researchers. That there is a fact and truth and reality woven into even the most fictitious of books, and your research is evident in here. I've traveled the world and been to many of the places that are described in here,
and I haven't.
And it is spot on.
Which I love hearing that, because that means that I did my research correctly and I managed to capture something I haven't even seen yet.
Absolutely. So there is a third book coming out.
There is, and then 2 more after that. So my readers have been waiting a long time for the 3rd installment in the Loki of Midgard series, but it was about to come out when the pandemic happened. So that threw everything into a tailspin for me, as long as everyone else. But what came out of it was something I was not expecting. As I was working through the Loki of Midgard material and doing all my research and developing my plot and starting to bring in some new characters that you're going to be treated to meet, I realized that one of them in particular, I needed to understand his backstory for why he does the things he does and how it fits into the Loki of Midgard series. So I decided I was going to write a short story. That's where I always start. As soon as you hear me say, I'm going to write a short story, just brace yourself for another series. It's a problem, but it's a good problem.
It's a great problem for us as readers. Let me continue to have more short story problems.
So I started writing what I thought was going to be a short story for this character. And what I ended up with is this beautiful trilogy that I, in some ways, consider to be my magnum opus, because it deals with some really difficult themes of just living life, being an adult, and facing some of the things that so many of us do, hardships and trials and emotional difficulties. There's so much of that in there. And so it is a prequel. It's a prequel to the Loki of Midgard series, and I had already written the first one before the pandemic started. And because of the pandemic, I revisited it and continued to work on the Loki of Midgard book 3, which had to be put on the back burner temporarily, because I realized that in order to be true to the story and to give the best experience to the readers, I needed to release this material first, because otherwise there's so many things that just aren't going to make sense, and it won't be as rich and deep of an experience for everyone who reads my material. So even though it's a little bit of a side trip, it absolutely is what needed to happen, and it's going to make everything just so much of a better experience in the end.
You hear that, Jennifer Meinking fans? You guys are getting the treat of actually getting a better quality product by having a pandemic happen. So this diversion, as you've called it, is actually the truest, straightest line from book 2 to book 3.
Correct, because we need to know what happened in the past in order to understand what's happening to Loki in book 3. It's called The Rising of a Rebel, and I really struggled with that name before I started this prequel material, and now I realized it is exactly where it needs to be. And you're going to wonder as you read book 3 just exactly who the rebel is, and the answer to that question is multifaceted, which makes it very fascinating in a way, because every villain believes that he is the hero in his own story. And as Loki said in the Loki series, he knows that not everyone is all good and not everyone is all bad. And so I've really explored a lot of those themes, and I think that it helps people as they're reading my books to understand a level of compassion and understanding for people who might make choices that we don't agree with. And that's where I'm going with this series. It's called A Pawn's Game, and I'm sure you've guessed it already, the pawn is Loki. And it is his childhood through Frigga's eyes, his mother. And it's what she experiences and what she goes through that sets the stage for the Loki of Midgard series. And that's why it was absolutely imperative that I at least introduce the first book of this trilogy to my readers first. And that should be available on Amazon by the time this episode launches. So
Yes, the link will be provided in the description. You will have access to it. And those that purchase the first of that series and comment on the comments below will have access to special pricing from Hotchkiss at Home for the Pampered Chef series. So we were talking a little bit about how you learned to dream and then how you learned to manifest those dreams through lived experience. Talk to me a little bit more about that. What was the most difficult decision that you have made, or decisions in pursuing your true self?
I think the most difficult thing is the vulnerability that comes from releasing material that is so near and dear to my heart, because a lot of what I write about, I have either experienced myself or someone that I know that is close to me has experienced it. So there's a vulnerability there with making this available basically to the world, because they are going to be able to see an inside door right into my heart and into my soul. And that can be a little bit intimidating. And I think it's something that stops a lot of really good writers from making their creations available to the world, because either they think it isn't perfect yet and they don't want to be judged, they don't want to hear any negative criticism, which is always going to come. You're never going to make everybody happy, so you might as well just stop trying now. But they also, I think, are afraid to let people really see them. But that openness and that vulnerability that you learn to develop, which of course you have to be careful. You've got to have boundaries in place, and you have to make sure that you're guarded where you need to be. But so many times I think that we close ourselves off and we don't make ourselves approachable because we aren't willing to share our authenticity. So one of the biggest lessons that I've learned in this author journey is being true to my authentic self. And sometimes that can be a little off-putting to people who are pretentious, or and they may not be pretentious on purpose. They might just feel they have to pretend, they have to keep up with the Joneses, they have to fit into a role. And as we are going to be exploring this material with Frigga, she's the queen of Asgard. She very much has to fill a role, and she's dealing with the complications of not being able to be true to her authentic self. And there's a lot at stake, and I think there's a lot of people who experience that, whether it's because they're in a position of power and authority, or because they have a lot of people depending on them, or for whatever reason. We feel those responsibilities keenly, and as adults we need to be responsible. However, sometimes we start to snuff out our own lights because we're not remembering who we were as children. And yes, you do need to grow up. However, that little child soul stays with you, and learning to be who you are and not allow someone else to tell you this is who you should be is something that is a difficult but very rewarding journey, because you grow and you learn to conform, and then you start to unbecome and you start to become more of your true self. And I think that every person who has experienced that journey of figuring out who they are and what their purpose is and why they're here and why they're interacting with others, for example, what can we pour out of ourselves onto other people as well. So it's kind of all wrapped up into that same bundle that we can absolutely 100% get in our own way. And I think that most of us, our greatest enemy is ourselves. And to overcome that and realize that you are capable of so much more than you think you are, but those defeatist voices in our own mind that might come from people in our past, or just might be our own psyche, can really get in the way. And I've had to do a lot of battle mentally especially with this new material that I'm about to release. But even with releasing Loki of Midgard, you have all those thoughts of, well, people might hate it. People might. They also might love it.
Yeah.
And if you keep your gifts and your creations to yourself and you never share them with others, then in a sense, you're almost keeping them from experiencing the joy that they can share with you from having seen and experienced your creation. And I think that's something that all artists need to think and hear, is that they don't realize how precious and important that is.
What attributes do you feel connect you to your purpose?
I think, honestly, that my greatest wish is to just pour into as many people as I can before I go out. And having literature that is available in print, on paper, that's going to continue even after I go out.
Absolutely.
I read something online recently that said something to the effect of, and this was to writers, imagine that long after you've gone, someone picks up your book and reads it and thinks, I would have loved this person, or I understand this person, or this person gets me. And that is something that really drives me, because I'm a person who seeks to understand. I want to understand other people, because if I can understand them, I can meet them where they're at and I can pour into them better. And that really got to me, because I think of some of the authors I have loved to read, like C.S. Lewis and Leo Tolstoy.
Yes.
And especially Leo Tolstoy, reading his book Anna Karenina,
Yes.
which I read that as part of my research for the second Loki of Midgard book, because I thought, well, how can I write Loki's reaction to this book if I haven't read it myself? And so that's been a lot of my drive as an author, is that if I can't experience it myself so that it's real, then I have to put everything into my research that I can. And it seemed that as I researched Anna Karenina and how other people had responded to it and other movies that have been made from it, I thought, I just need to read it. So I did, and when I read it, it just had such a profound impact on me. And I thought, Leo Tolstoy's been dead for a long time, but yet he thought the same thoughts that I think. He struggled with the same things that I struggle with. And I thought, how profound that a human being who lived before I was ever born, lived and died before I was ever born, before my parents were even born, somehow understood things that I feel that many of my peers don't. And it was that connection, and human connection is so important to me. And I think that it's what fills us, it's what drives us, it's what keeps us going. We're social creatures. And we connect on different levels with different people. But I do think that human connection is a part of my purpose.
Absolutely. I would definitely agree with that 100%. And I know that we've talked about this before, about the differences between the physical experience versus the remote experience. And I definitely think that one of the most beautiful things about written pieces is just that. Before we had such global connections, before we were able to travel so readily, before we were able to turn on social media and really have that kind of interconnectedness with information and experience, books and maps were our way of traveling through time and through space and into cultures, and that holds true today. So 100%, you've definitely given people who are yet to come beautiful gifts, and so excited about the next chapters and the next future writing. I have no doubt that they will be equally, if not even more so, imbibed with that incredible ability that you have to take human experience and weave it into a story full of mystery and intrigue and history and food and travel, and it's just it's wonderful. If you were to say something to your younger self, if you were to inspire yourself to reach that most genuine you sooner or better or later even, what would you teach yourself?
Probably what I would teach anyone else who is facing the journey, as I've started to call it. But it is so much harder to speak kindly to yourself than it is to speak to others. We're so much harder on ourselves. We show grace to other people that we don't show ourselves. And so I think that what I would probably tell my younger self was a message I desperately needed to hear but could not receive from other people because I needed to hear it from myself. And that is to like yourself. Just like yourself. You've been made a specific way. There's nothing wrong with you. Well, there might be things that could be improved, but you know, as you grow and as you learn and as you change and as you develop, realize that you are the only person that you are going to carry with you for the rest of your life. There is nowhere that you can go to escape from yourself, so you'd better like yourself. And that, I think, is something that so many people just don't have. There's a lot of bitter, angry, hurting people walking around that hate themselves. And it's sad, especially when so many of those people have some inner gift, inner spark that is buried deep within them, just like it was for me. And all it takes sometimes is the right key to unlock that. And then you can sparkle and shine just like you were meant to do. And I wish that I would have told myself that sooner, because somewhere along the line I realized that nobody was going to rescue me, that I needed to do it myself. And people who are stuck in really difficult situations, you know, life is just going to continue to beat you down. It's just not going to stop. But the more you get up, the stronger you get, the more that you appreciate what you bring to the table and make that available to other people, I think the more you can weather those storms.
Absolutely, absolutely. Just for a little bit of background, Jennifer is not just an incredible artisan. She's also an incredible person. Tell us a little bit about your amazing family.
Well, I have 10 children. A lot of people, when they hear that, there's the initial shock, like, who in the world would do that? Me. It wasn't exactly all planned, and there's times I joke around that I wouldn't recommend it because it's very stressful, and there are a lot of hardships that come from having a large family. But at the same time, when I look at my kids as individuals, I think these are some of the coolest people, and I'm so privileged to have them in my lives, even though it has been hard. It has been really hard, but sometimes the hardest things end up bringing the most amazing, beautiful results. And I can honestly say, last night I was looking at my oldest daughter, just looking at her and thinking, wow, I had a hand in that. She's an amazing person, and she's a huge part of why I started this journey. I started writing my fan fiction that turned into this whole Loki of Midgard universe, and is no longer a fan fiction, I might add. She was the one who encouraged me to do it, and I wrote that for her, and she's helped me so much along the way. I actually dedicated my first book to her.
Yes, yes.
And every single one of the other children that I've had, they all have something. And every person does, if you can just look for it. But to be able to see that in these little babies that I've raised, and some of them are more raised than others. My youngest is almost 3. It's just such a privilege, even though it can get really, really hard.
Yeah, absolutely. Life is messy, and
Yes, it is. And people are messy.
people are messy, and it is wonderful to be able to make mud pies out of mud.
That was one of my favorite things to do as a kid. I loved mud pies. I didn't eat them, but I loved making them.
Yeah,
Just
absolutely.
seeing what would happen. And
Yeah, 100%. Do you want to pause that and see where we're at on the pie? Are we okay?
did the timer just go off?
It wasn't on.
It wasn't?
No, so I didn't turn it on.
The oven?
It's on now.
The oven hasn't been on?
It just started. Yeah.
Oh.
Okay.
So it's not even close to
No, it just
done.
started the timer.
That means I'm not gonna get any.
Yeah.
That's
You will. I will save you some. I will bring you some. Okay. Okay. So,
You'll have to probably film the finished pie without me.
I will. Yeah. What are just a couple more things? What are some of the criteria that you use for making your decisions with your branding, as well as with your creative element? You've talked a little bit about, or we've talked a little bit about how you utilized Kickstarter
Mm-hmm.
to allow the first books and subsequent ones to be born out of nothing, really. What were some of the things that you did to turn the still small voice that you had that said write or create into what we have today?
Some of it honestly did come from the input of other people who supported me on this journey, who saw something in the creative work that I had put out. Because I really didn't believe in myself when I started. I knew I needed to write, and I unlocked my inner author. I let her out. There was no putting her back in once that had happened. But then I had a really, really good friend that I used to go walking with, and I started telling her about the story, and I read her some of it, and she said, "You've got to do something with this." And then my daughter said the same, and there were numerous people along the way. I can't possibly name them all, but there were so many people who believed in me even when I didn't. And their voices and their strength coming alongside began to help me to develop strength of my own, to where I realized, you know, those first negative reviews that I got on Amazon, some of them really stung. And I thought, I'm a terrible writer, I should just pull it now. And you go through that, and then you realize that's utter nonsense. You listen to the negative, and it far outweighs the positive sometimes, but you have to overcome that and realize that for every person who has something negative to say, that is normally coming from a place that they're at, and it has much less to do with you. I had another very good friend that I haven't talked to in a really long time, but I remember sitting with her, we had had lunch together, sitting with her across from the table. She said to me, "You really don't like Mountain Dew. I like Mountain Dew. What does that say about the Mountain Dew?" And me being snarky, I said, "Well, Mountain Dew is disgusting." And she says absolutely nothing about the Mountain Dew. It says everything about us and our tastes.
Yeah.
And she said, and that is how you need to start thinking when it comes to how people view you. If you're not somebody's cup of tea, that is because they have a specific cup of tea that they might be looking for. It says nothing about you. And just because they're not your cup of tea or you're not their cup of tea doesn't mean that you might not be someone else's brand of vodka, for example. So that really helped me because I used to be a huge people pleaser, and I still have elements of that. It's part of what's made me a caring person, but it also made me realize I can't live my life for other people. And so when I've made my decisions, I have taken advice and input from people that I respect, opinions that I value, but at the end of the day, I've realized that this is my life and I have to make my decisions because, once again, I'm the only person I'm going to carry with me for the rest of my life, and my decisions are going to impact others, yes, but they're going to impact me the most. And so I need to make sure that I'm making wise decisions that are beneficial not only to myself but also to those around me, because if I'm hurting and I'm reacting in bitterness and angst, that's going to spread out onto other people as well. And the silly adage, if mama ain't happy, nobody happy, it's silly, but it's also true.
Yeah, it's very true.
And that's one thing I've had to think about with my family and with my children, is that if I, as a mother, pour myself into them and never take care of myself, eventually they won't have me anymore.
Yeah.
Because you can't sustain that. And if I am completely void of any passion or purpose, and all I'm doing is changing diapers and cleaning up human fluid and all of the stuff that comes, the unpleasant things of motherhood, and I have nothing else to live for, that's what drives people to despair. And I have been at that place of despair. And when you have something that you have just for you, that you can kind of hang on to, it fills your bucket and allows you to then pour out onto other people. And I think a lot of moms make that mistake where everything is about their children. And in a sense, you know, especially when they're little, it needs to be. But also, when you invest in yourself as a mother and as a person, and you remember, I am a person, I'm still the person I was before I had these children, and I'm going to be the person when they are grown and gone, even though that doesn't change your love for them at all. You're teaching them by leading by example that you can fly, you can achieve your dreams, because look at me, I'm doing it.
Yes.
And that was something that really overrode a lot of the mom guilt that I struggled with as I began to embark on this journey, because there were well-meaning people who told me, you shouldn't be doing this right now. You have so many children, how can you possibly be doing this? And I had to silence those voices. I knew that they came from a well-meaning place, but I also knew that I had to do this for them, to teach them that they can reach for their dreams, but also for me.
And they do. I've met a couple of your children, and they 100% do. And you can see that in the pictures of the other kids, that spark is alive and well in them. They dream and they create and they experience to a fuller extent, for sure. So definitely want to say how refreshing it is to see that, because there absolutely is, like you said, that element of modeling needed in order to not just teach people how to navigate life, but to live.
Yes.
So,
And not just survive.
Yeah, absolutely.
So many people, they survive and they don't thrive.
Yeah.
And they don't realize that, circumstances aside, I realize there are some very, very bad circumstances out there. But I'm going to quote Rocky. I love the Rocky movies. And Sylvester Stallone, when he's playing Rocky, he says, it's not about how hard you can hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. That's how winning is done. So, and there's been so many times when I've wanted to just lay on the ground and bleed. Like, just leave me alone, let me die. But eventually I dust myself off and I get up, because there's too much at stake to not.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Before we wrap up, what are the different ways that your fan base, that readers and that new fans of the Jennifer Meinking brand can get in touch with you? How do you connect with your people, with your tribe?
Well, I have Google presence, so you can Google Jennifer Meinking and probably find everything you need to know as far as getting a hold of me. I love hearing from my readers. I love getting emails or Facebook messages or Instagram messages telling me, I really loved your book, or I really didn't like this part of your book. Can we talk about it? And you know, I like the feedback. And I think a lot of times people are afraid because I'm an author. So they're like, oh, I can't reach out to her. No, do. You know, as long as I'm able to, because I am only one person and I am pulled in a lot of different directions, but as long as I'm able to have those discussions, I want to. I love to talk with people about the themes behind my literature, why I wrote a scene the way that I did. And honestly, my goal is to not necessarily answer questions for people, but to get them to think deeper and to ask the hard questions, the things that so many of us think about that we don't necessarily talk about. And if I have inspired some kind of feeling, even if it's negative, you know, I've had people react to my literature just like, I can't believe you wrote that, and what are you trying to say? And that is
good.
That it is good. It's grabbing onto something in their heart that maybe they need to take a second look at, not necessarily because the way they think or feel is wrong, but because there's obviously something that's creating a response, and maybe that's something that they need to look at for themselves. And if I can do that for other people, then I think that is an incredible privilege. And then when people talk to me about it, it's even better. So my email address is out there. I have a website, jennifermeinking.com. You can sign up for my newsletter on my website. I don't send out a lot of newsletters except when it's Kickstarter time, and then you might get bombarded a little bit. I'm on Facebook. I am on Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest. Some of them I monitor more than others.
All of Jennifer's links are provided here in the description.
And Amazon.
And
That's the other
Amazon.
one.
And aside from the books, you also have clothing, merchandise. You have water bottles.
Yes.
You have jewelry.
That's right.
Tell us all the different ways that we can cover ourselves with the Loki of Midgard universe. How many different forms does Loki come in merchandise at this moment?
So I always joke around with anyone who's seen the Loki series, the Disney series. I said I created a variant of Loki before it was cool. But I have the Loki water bottles. I have these custom made. I also have the shirts that I have quite a few of those. And I have hoodies that I only have one left of, and that's mine, but I'm planning to do another run, so I will have those. I also have the Loki of Midgard signature ring. I don't know if you can see that on the camera, but this contains all of his heritage, and so it's very important to who my version of Loki is. And I have this that I'm wearing right here is a Valkyrie pendant. So in the Upon Games series, I will be discussing the birth of the Valkyries. And in my universe, they ride dragons.
Oh.
So these are pendants that the dragon riding healer warrior women that are Valkyries in my universe, they wear these. This one is Frigga's, Loki's mother, and there is a story behind this. There's a reason behind all of the gemstones. And then I made these earrings to match. So this was not made by me. This was made by someone local who is a very gifted artisan himself. And he's one of my readers, one of my actors for my audiobook that's going to be coming out. So he has handcrafted these. We designed it together, and then he is the one who put them together. There are other colors in this as well. And then I made the earrings. And then I also have another special little gift that is to be revealed more than likely on Valentine's Day. Which will be after this airs, but they'll be available through me. So you can contact me on Instagram to order. It's probably the easiest way. And I take payments through Square, so that is nice and protected for you so that you can feel comfortable paying that way. I don't have a website set up for ordering just yet. That is in process. When it launches, it will be called Loki Loot. And it will have a lot of different Loki merchandise and material. And I'm always working on new ideas and new things to do because I do Kickstarter a lot, and I just love merch. It's just fun. So there's a bunch of different things that I offer. Oh, also Loki drinkware. That's the newest thing that I just brought out, and I wish I could have brought some with me today, but I at least brought the water bottle. But we have shot glasses. We have tumblers, we have stemless wine glasses, and beer steins. The beer steins are incredible. And we also have travel mugs. So there's a bunch of different stuff. I go to Comic Cons as often as I can. I know I will be doing a Renaissance fair in Albuquerque in March. I'm hoping to possibly make an appearance in Philadelphia, but I'm not sure. And London is in my future.
Yes, it is.
So there's a lot. There's a lot happening, a lot in the works, a lot of places. If you want me to come to your city, give me the information and I will see if I can make it happen. I love to meet my readers too.
Absolutely. So you hear that? Like and subscribe. If you would like more information as Jennifer's brand expands, we will be updating this episode. We'd love to have you back on another episode. And for you to make something else absolutely delectable for us to eat. Thank you for coming to Hotchkiss at Home and for being the pilot interview. It really means a great deal to us. If you are interested in more interviews, please like and subscribe, and please connect with Jennifer Meinking and the Loki of Midgard universe with the links below. All right, so we're all done baking. Let me get this open for you.
So when you're taking it out of the oven, just kind of jiggle it a little bit. If it doesn't move, that is a really good sign. So this is absolutely beautiful. We can see here that it's not moving, but it's nice and light. It's not too brown. It should be absolutely perfect. Now we're gonna test it with a tester just to make sure that we don't have anything oozing in there. But it actually looks really good.
I'm actually super jealous that the oven got the first taste. There we go.
This end? Oh,
Nope.
okay. So it's coming out clean, and I'm gonna just like poke around in there just a little bit, and I see nice, beautiful, fluffy eggs. I don't see anything runny. That's cheese. Okay,
Terrific.
I think
Well,
it's finished.
that's our cue. Go ahead and
Do we have a plate? Oh, and you know what we forgot was the rest of the green onions. We're gonna.
I actually have them right here for you.
Awesome. So we're gonna plate this guy. Now this is optional, but it's really sweet to put green onions on here, fresh ones, before you serve it. So we're gonna pull that out. Oh, look at that. Oh, it smells amazing. You smell that?
I do. It's incredible. Just being here and being able to eat it visually and to smell it is amazing. You are truly a gifted baker.
Well, I'll tell you what, the recipe sure does help a lot. Okay, so we're gonna just sprinkle a little bit of green onion on there just to make it a little bit more aesthetically pleasing, and there we go. Ooh, this is way too hot for me. Oops.
It is amazing. Absolutely amazing.
Oh, wow. Ah, that's pretty good.